Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're doing a really close analysis of the political strategy and the voter trends shaping up for the 2026 midterms.
Yeah, we're focusing on two main things, right? How the parties are trying, maybe desperately, to get these quote-unquote quality candidates on the ballot.
Exactly. And second, looking at these really significant shifts in how people are voting,
Yeah.
specifically voters without a college degree. What's driving that?
It's definitely the right time. I mean, history tells us the president's party almost always takes a hit in the midterms. That's been noted for ages.
Right, like Galston over at Brookings points out.
Precisely. And when you think about the House, control can flip based on maybe, what, 40 seats, give or take?
It's that tight, so every little decision matters: who runs, what they say locally, which groups are turning out.
Absolutely mission critical.
Okay, so to help us unpack all this, we've pulled together analysis from Brookings, some interesting ideological takes from Vox, plus the latest polling we could find from YouGov and the Working Class Project.
So we've got the strategy side and the voter psychology piece.
We're aiming to get past just the numbers and into the why. So let's jump in. Part one, this hunt for the quality candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that term sounds a bit subjective, doesn't it? Like someone the party brass just happens to like. But political scientists, folks like Jacobson and Cornell, they actually have a pretty straightforward definition.
They do, yeah. It's surprisingly simple.
Yeah.
The easiest, most standard measure is just, have they held elected office before?
Prior office holding experience. So it's not just, are they famous?
Not just that. It signals they probably have some political skill, they likely have fundraising contacts already set up, and crucially, they've shown they can actually win an election. They're a known entity.
Okay, so that makes sense for party strategy. You start by protecting who you've already got in office, right?
Yeah,
Incumbents.
absolutely. Re-election rates are generally pretty high, so
Yeah.
step one is defense. The DCCC, that's the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, they've already flagged, what, 26 incumbents as frontliners?
Yeah, the ones they see as most vulnerable. People like Representative Josh Harder out in California. He won a district that Trump actually carried in 2024. That's tough territory.
Definitely. And while the Dems are focused on protecting those seats, the Republicans, specifically the NRSC, the Senate committee, they're actually trying to manage their own ranks internally.
How so?
Well, they're basically telling ambitious House members, hey, maybe stay put for now. They're even warning big donors not to fund House incumbents who decide to make a run for the Senate.
Wow, really trying to keep experienced hands in the House fight.
They see those incumbents as vital for holding on to their majority or trying to win it back in the House itself.
Okay, so defense first.
Yeah.
But they also need to recruit new people, especially for open seats or challenging the other side. What's the buzz on recruitment? Who are they looking for?
Well, strong local connections are always valuable. You see names popping up like Paige Cognetti, the mayor of Scranton, potentially for PAA, or Bob Brooks in PA7, he's the state firefighters union president.
People with real roots in the community.
Exactly. But beyond that, there's a definite trend right now, a sort of hot profile that both parties seem interested in.
And that is.
Military veterans,
Yeah.
especially women, often with some kind of national security background. Think Abigail Stanberger in Virginia, Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey, that type of profile.
Democrats seem particularly focused on that, don't they?
They really are. Part of the thinking is it helps push back against that perception, fair or not, that the party has drifted too far left.
So what is it about the veteran profile that seems to cut through the usual noise?
Someone from Vote Vets, Travis Taslar, put it pretty well. He said, basically, the average voter doesn't immediately stick a veteran into a hard left or hard right box.
Interesting.
Yeah, it signals something else: service, duty, maybe confidence, a focus on the country. It kind of bypasses some of the immediate cultural triggers. They often come across as more moderate, almost by default.
That sounds like a smart strategy, trying to find candidates who can appeal more broadly. But there's always a catch, isn't there? The party can recruit all they want, but they don't always get the final say.
Exactly right. The primary voters. That's the big risk. Party leaders can find their ideal candidate, pour resources in, and then the primary electorate chooses someone else entirely.
Someone they might see as, well, a flawed contender.
And that can cost them a seat they probably should have won in the general election. The classic case everyone still talks about is Christine O'Donnell back in 2010.
Oh, yeah, Delaware. She won the Republican Senate primary.
But then her campaign kind of imploded in the general, especially after that famous "I am not a witch" ad.
Which was a response to something she'd said years before, right? It just blew up.
It became a huge distraction. It really highlights how sometimes What primary voters value, maybe perceived authenticity or ideological purity, isn't the same as what the party's strategists see as electability or quality based on experience.
That fit seems really subjective and hard to pin down.
It absolutely is.
Okay, so we've got the parties trying to engineer the right candidates, but ultimately it's the voters who decide. So let's pivot now to those voters, specifically the non-college educated group. This is where we've seen huge shifts.
Massive shifts. Just look at the 2024 numbers. Non-college voters overall went for Trump 56% to Harris's 42%.
And if you narrow it down to white non-college voters, it was even more stark. 66% for Trump, only 32% for Harris. A landslide.
Huge margins. And for a long time, the main explanation you heard for this was all about economics, sort of the globalization grief idea.
Right, the argument that Democrats basically abandoned the working class with trade deals like NAFTA, normalizing trade with China.
Which led to factories closing, deindustrialization, hitting union towns really hard. Thinkers like Duke Gantz made this case.
But it's not that simple, is it?
Right.
Because our sources also push back on that narrative pretty strongly.
They do. Vox, for instance, argues that, well, maybe the negative impacts of trade get overstated sometimes. They point out that the median worker in the U.S. actually earns more today in real wages than back when NAFTA was signed.
And that cheaper imported goods benefited a lot of people as consumers.
Right. Plus, they make the point that Democrats have been losing support in areas that haven't had much manufacturing for a very long time. So it can't just be about lost factory jobs.
Okay, so how do we square that circle? We have real economic pain in some places, but the national data tells a slightly different story.
It's tricky. The national median income figures are true, but they can mask that really intense, localized devastation. Losing one big unionized plant in a smaller town, maybe due to automation as much as trade, could just wreck the local economy in ways national averages don't show.
And that feeling of precariousness is still very real. We see polls now showing nearly half of Americans, something like 45%, would struggle with an unexpected $1,000 bill.
And it's even higher, about a third saying it's impossible among people who self-identify as working class. So the economic anxiety is definitely there.
Okay, so anxiety is there, but maybe the political shift isn't solely driven by economics, especially if national income hasn't plummeted overall. This gets us to the other big argument, the ideological one.
Exactly. Folks like Alan Abramowitz argue pretty convincingly that this is more about a fundamental ideological realignment, not just a reaction to economic ups and downs.
What's the evidence for that?
Well, look at party identification among white, non-college voters. It's been shifting towards Republicans steadily for decades, since the 70s, from about 33% Republican back then to over 55% now. That's a long-term trend through good economies and bad.
That's compelling. It's not just a recent thing.
Not at all. And here's another kicker. Republican affiliation is actually highest among the non-college whites who are doing better financially. Among those in the top income brackets for that group, like the 95th percentile, Republican support is around 74%.
Wow. So it's definitely not just about voting your immediate pocketbook, is it?
Doesn't look like it for many in that group,
Yeah.
which points towards culture, values, identity.
The cultural divide. White non-college voters are just much more conservative on average than college-educated whites when it comes to issues like abortion, guns, immigration.
Big differences there. And this is where the moral psychology angle, like Jonathan Haidt talks about, comes in. It's really insightful.
Explain that a bit.
Well, Haidt argues that politics isn't always about rational economic self-interest. It's often about competing moral visions of the good society. And conservatives, he suggests, appeal to a broader set of moral foundations, things like loyalty, authority, sanctity, which really resonate with concerns about social order, tradition, national identity.
So the idea is that many working-class voters are casting their ballot based on their moral interests, looking for leaders who project strength, order, patriotism.
Rather than what they might see as a sort of nanny state, just focus on care, redistribution, or maybe getting bogged down in complex social issues they don't connect with, they want national greatness, stability.
Okay, that connects back brilliantly to the candidate strategy we talked about earlier. Recruiting a veteran or someone with a blue-collar background, that image taps right into those values of authority, loyalty, maybe sanctity in a way.
Absolutely. It's an attempt to meet those voters on that moral ground. And the polling really underscores the challenge this poses for Democrats.
Yeah, what does the Working Class Project data show there?
It shows non-college voters align much more with Republicans on handling the economy, crime, immigration. And get this, asked which recent president did the most for working families. 44% said Trump. Only 12% said Biden.
Oof. That's a huge perception gap.
It is, and it shapes what kind of government they even want. It's not necessarily smaller government across the board.
Right, only 19% want a big federal government focused on inequality.
But almost half, 47%, want an active government, one that sort of steers the economy, protects free markets, but also promotes opportunity. Think enabling, not just redistributing.
So for Democrats, this means a major rethink of their messaging, doesn't it?
Definitely. The polling suggests they need to move away from just attacking the wealthy and focus much more on language around rewarding hard work, cracking down on corruption, showing they value people who, work with their hands or provide essential services.
And policy-wise, what resonates?
Practical stuff. Bringing down healthcare costs, prescription drugs, that's huge. Cutting taxes for the middle and working class. Promoting things like apprenticeships, maybe more than broader student loan forgiveness, which can feel abstract or unfair to those who didn't go to college.
And culturally?
Moderation seems key. The data shows these voters actually prefer candidates who will call out both parties for getting too obsessed with the culture wars, things like transgender rights debates, and who promise to refocus on the economic basics.
They want someone to just get back to business, essentially.
Pretty much. Which brings us back to that rugged guy strategy. You see, Democrats consciously trying to adopt the Fetterman, look, the sweatshirt, the shorts. It's a visual cue.
An attempt at projecting authenticity and connection.
Exactly. And running ads featuring candidates who actually have those blue-collar backgrounds. An oyster farmer, a mechanic, a steam fitter. They're trying to embody that moral vision of competence and hard work that resonates.
Okay, let's zoom out then. We've got this long-term shift among white, non-college voters towards the GOP. Driven by ideology and culture, we've got parties trying to adapt candidate profiles. How does this all look heading into 2026 right now?
Well, interestingly, despite that big structural shift, the very latest polling, like the October YouGov Economist poll, actually shows Democrats with a bit of a lead in the generic House ballot.
About 5 points, you said. Their biggest lead since mid-August.
Yeah, 44% Dem, 39% GOP in that generic congressional vote question. And President Trump's approval ratings are quite low, net -17. He's hitting new lows for his second term. Among some key groups, women are -28 net approval, seniors -13, Hispanics way down to -46.
So some headwinds for the incumbent party, as expected, but maybe not a total GOP wave building just yet.
Seems that way for now, and a big part of that is likely the economy, or rather, pessimism about it.
People are still worried about prices.
Oh yeah, 68% expect prices to keep going up. But here's the crucial part for Democrats. Voters are currently much more likely to blame Trump, 57%, than Biden, who's only blamed by 24% for the state of the economy.
That economic discontent, directed at the current president, could be the Democrats' biggest opening if they message it right, connecting it back to those working-class priorities we talked about.
It absolutely could be. But we need to be careful not to only focus on the white working class.
Because the electorate itself is changing.
Dramatically. That white non-college group. Huge in the 50s, like over 80% of voters. Today, it's closer to 40%. Still very important, but not the whole story.
And the sources point out something else interesting about 2024. DeLeo at Brookings noted that while Trump did incredibly well with white evangelical working class voters,
his biggest gains in that evangelical group were actually among women with college degrees.
So it's complex, but the really big, maybe game-changing shift in 2024 wasn't just the continuation of the white working class trend.
No. The truly decisive swing, the one that caught many off guard, was among non-white voters. Across the board, college grads and non-college alike.
Democratic support dropped significantly among both groups.
It did. Latino working-class men, just as one example, went for Trump 55% to 43%. That's a massive shift away from traditional Democratic coalitions.
Okay, so this changes the picture quite a bit. It suggests maybe the story isn't just about the decades-long ideological realignment of white working-class voters.
It might suggest that the more recent movement among non-white working-class voters could be driven by different factors, maybe more by immediate economic pain, like inflation under the previous administration, or general disappointment with results.
Even though, as you mentioned, non-white voters generally hold more liberal views on major policies compared to white working-class voters.
That's the key difference. They tend to align more with Democrats on things like the role of government, social safety nets, even some cultural issues. Their shift might be less about a fundamental ideological break and more about, perhaps, performance and economic conditions, potentially more reversible.
Okay, so let's try and tie this together. We've talked about the party machinery trying to find the quality candidate, the veteran, the rugged guy. partly to appeal to that moral, cultural dimension we see particularly strongly in the white working class vote.
Right, connecting competence and values. But the really critical trend, the one to watch maybe even more closely for 2026, isn't just that long-term white working class story. It's this more recent, significant movement among non-white working class voters.
Because they're generally more aligned with Democrats on policy, their shift might signal something different, maybe economic frustration, maybe a feeling of being taken for granted.
It could be. They remain, on the whole, much more liberal on policy than their white counterparts.
So this brings us to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to really mull over as we head towards the midterms.
Given that non-white working class voters are generally more liberal on many issues, and their recent shift might be tied more closely to economic factors like inflation or specific policy disappointments.
Is the biggest challenge for Democrats in 2026 not necessarily winning back the deeply conservative white working class, which has been trending away for 50 years, but instead figuring out how to re-energize and mobilize their increasingly diverse, culturally more liberal, non-white working class base?
That might be the more achievable and perhaps more critical task for them right now. Definitely something to watch unfold.